preface this, the Board Finance and Operations Committee, as well as the study session prior to this board meeting, had an opportunity to review the results that Ms. Chambers is going to present tonight, and we are happy to have our partners with Plante Moran to provide the annual audit update. She is accompanied by Christy Menino, who was the manager on the audit. So please, Jennifer.
All the way to the right, the three ellipses. You want to make it full screen? Go to presenter, or present rather. I was gonna come up and do it.
All right, thank you. All right. Thank you to the Board of Education for having us here to present tonight. As was introduced, my name is Jennifer Chambers. I'm the lead partner on your audit tonight, and I'm here with Christy Menino, who is the manager on the engagement. We provided you with some information to go through tonight. Before we get into the overview of the financial results, I did want to discuss the deliverables that you've received related to the audit. There were 3 items that you would have received in your board packets tonight. The first is the basic financial statements that was labeled financial report. The second is the federal programs audit. And the third is the letter entitled report to the Board of Education. These were in draft form as we prepared for the presentation tonight, and the final issued versions will be completed in the next day or so. As it relates to the first deliverable, the financial report, this is what we often refer to as the financial statements of the district. We have performed the audit of the district's financial statements in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America and in accordance with government auditing standards. As a result of our audit, we have issued an unmodified opinion, which is the highest form of assurance that we can give that the district's financial statements are fairly presented. Also included in the financial report is a footnote describing that the district was subjected to the bond and sinking fund compliance requirements, and our audit procedures included evaluation of those requirements. We did not identify any compliance issues with the costs that we selected for testing. As it relates to the second item I mentioned, the federal programs audit. This is a separate audit performed over the district's federal grants received. This year, the district received approximately $3.8 million in federal funding, and annually we go through an assessment based on the federal guidelines to determine which programs that we will select for testing. This year, we selected the Special Education Cluster, or IDEA, for testing, and this program was found to be in compliance with the grant regulations, and we issued an unmodified opinion on this program as well. The final deliverable that I wanted to touch on briefly is the one entitled Report to the Board of Education. This outlines required post-audit communications and includes several informational items for your review and consideration. There continues to be impactful changes in the funding landscape at the state, and there's other critical areas that we feel are important that the board should be aware of. This communication is designed to be a helpful guide in furthering your understanding of those matters. I do want to congratulate the district and thank Ms. Moynihan and the business office staff for all of their efforts during the audit. We appreciated the opportunity to be on site here, working directly with all of the staff. Their responsiveness made it a very smooth process, and we appreciated all of the efforts towards that. I will now turn it over to Christy. We'll walk through an overview of the financial results, and then we can go through any questions that you would have.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, so the first slide that I'm going to be covering is the non-recurring COVID-19 relief awards and expenditures as of June 30th, 2024. We've shown this slide for a few years now, and we want to really place a lot of emphasis, that this is non-recurring funding, and it has come to an end. You'll see in the top right corner, the total awarded COVID relief funding was $11.9 million, and total expended to date through June 30th, 2024 was $11.6 million. You'll see on the left, it covers all of the different ESSER grants. In the blue would be the total award amount, and then beneath that is the orange, which shows the expended amount through June 30th. Also important to note that under each of the grant names, you have the grant period. So the grant period is presented, so you can see when these funds must be expended by. Important to note, the last date for ESSER 3 was September 30th, 2024, which has since passed. And then moving into the general fund revenue and other sources for the year ended June 30th, 2024. Total revenue was $109.8 million. Primarily, that includes the state funding, which was about 52.8% of total revenue. State revenue is the state portion of the foundation allowance, per pupil funding, as well as categoricals. The per pupil funding was $13,443 in fiscal year '24, which was an increase of $458 from fiscal year '23. And then also just a quick note, in the state amount, included in this is $11.1 million in funding from the state, which is required to be paid back immediately to the retirement system, and it cannot be used for operating expenditures. And then you'll see in the dark blue, the second largest portion, it relates to local revenue, which was 37% of total revenue. And this is primarily property tax. And then you'll see in the mustard color is federal revenue of almost $3 million that we covered on the previous slide, which was ESSER funding and primarily special education funding. Switching gears into the general fund expenditures and other uses, this is showing the total expenditures of $108.8 million, and this is showing by function. Majority of the expenditures you'll see is related to the instruction and instructional support in that mustard color of 72.8% of the total expenditures. In the next slide, you'll see we're still covering that same $108 million of expenditures, but this is breaking it down by object code. So through year ended June 30th, 2024, primarily, as expected, is made up of salary and benefits. So this encompassed about 86.2% of total expenditures. Also important to note in here too that in that employee benefit amount in the orange, this includes that $11.1 million of the retirement expense that we covered on the revenue slide. And then switching gears into the analysis of general fund balance. You'll see there's two sections of this slide. The top section shows the change in fund balance. So as of June 30th, 2024, fund balance was approximately $22.7 million. This was a change of around $1.1 million from June 30th, 2023. Of this balance, the components of fund balance at the bottom of the slide, you'll see the total fund balance of $22.7 million was primarily unassigned of $21.9 million. You'll also see the assigned portion of $5,540. That is the adopted budget for fiscal year '25, which shows a slight use of fund balance in the coming year. And then the last slide that I'll be covering before passing it back to Jennifer is the retirement funding. So this slide shows the MIPSR's expense over the last 10 years. And you'll see that expense has increased over time, and it's a significant expense to the district. You'll see in 2023, this amount has, spiked, but in 2024 is returned to normal trend. The 2023 amount included almost $6 million of one-time 147C state payment toward the MIPSR's unfunded liability. The funding provided from the state helps the district, but there still is an increasing trend on the retirement rate, which the state continues to project will have the same trajectory at least for the next few years. And then this slide you'll see includes both the gross amount of the $27.7 million of the district retirement expense, but also the net amount, which shows $16.5 million. So that difference is that 11.1 of the retirement pass-through expense that we covered previously. Also, just to note, both of these amounts and percentages do not include the amounts withheld and paid by employees based on their elections. right, and then passing it back to Jennifer for highlights and challenges.
So rounding out with just some overall commentary, we covered primarily the general fund and really the financial results of the past year, but kind of looking forward and taking a look at just some overall highlights and challenges as you continue to plan for the future. From an overall perspective, some highlights, stepping away from the general fund specifically. It's great to see from a community support perspective that the district was able to have a successful approval of the hold harmless millage renewed for 20 years. That will bring a secure source of revenue to the district going forward, along with the successful renewal that you had of your sinking fund millage to help alleviate the burden of repairs and maintenance that the general fund would have otherwise had to bear. Those are important things as, again, from a funding source perspective, that's important and built into the overall structure of the district. And so we wanted to be able to highlight and commend the district and the community for getting behind those important initiatives. The district is well positioned financially, and from our vantage point, taking a look in terms of the district's financial picture, we were able to see continued demonstration of fiscal responsibility in terms of what we saw from a processes perspective and overall financial results, and wanted to highlight that as well. Looking forward, as you continue to plan, having that continued focus on enrollment and projections, and the impact of what that could mean. When you take a look at what the overall revenue source is, particularly to the general fund, with the primary source being from the state, that formula being the per pupil funding, pupil being one piece of it, the allocated amount from the state being the other. The fact that there was no foundation allowance increase or change going into fiscal '25, and then with the projected amount of enrollment for any given district, that paints a picture in terms of what districts can do with that very important funding source. And so we're really just encouraging, all districts to make sure that it's more important now more than ever to just continue to have that focus on the funding sources that you have, and making sure that, you're kind of planning for that uncertainty into the future as that heavy reliance on state funding continues. There also continues to be, I think, continued challenges around the increased level of categorical revenue that comes from the state. We've seen that shift as the state continues to allocate more towards these individual categoricals. A lot of that comes with strings attached or very specific uses for those funds, which sometimes means districts can't utilize all of those funds if you cannot identify ways to be able to utilize those. Also becomes, a little bit more labor intensive to be able to track all of those individual uses, and all of those, they become all of these individual grants. And so finding just more and more challenges associated with each of these revenue sources. And so just bringing those to your attention, just as that landscape continues to get a little bit more complex, as the state continues to structure things differently, allocate the revenue sources differently. So just things to keep in mind, a little bit more qualitative, stepping beyond what you see on the graphs. But we appreciate the opportunity to present tonight, and certainly welcome any questions on the financial results or any of the other deliverables that you've had a chance to review.
I'd be surprised if there weren't any
And
questions.
I think a question potentially our community would have that I don't know that you have the answer for is on page 3 of the presentation, where it indicates that we were awarded $4.954 million in ESSER 3 funds and only spent 4.6, which would have been 300,000 less. And I don't know that you have the answer for that, but I think the community might want to know, are we still in the process of spending that? Is that like, or do we just
lose $340,000 of awarded funds.
So I think we can provide the detail behind it, but you can see the award date, or it had to be spent by 9/30/24. So there's some timing issue there. We had until September 30th. Candace can probably provide more context or detail, unless you have it on what the specific $300,000 is for.
Yeah, the unspent ESSER 3 equalization, we also.
Do you mind coming up to the microphone? Sorry.
So as Superintendent West had mentioned, this audit is for the period through June 30th, 2024. So the period of July 1, 2024 through September 30th will be encompassed in next year's audit. So when we have Jennifer and Christy joining us again in a year from now, the ESSER 3 equalization, you may have heard it called 11T funds in the past as well. They're one and the same. Essentially during 23-24, we utilized those funds to cover some summer school activities for the eligible students with that particular grant, as well as the after-school activities of the tutoring funds that we had available during the school year. And so those leftover funds, we're going to be pivoting into another year utilizing Section 23 funds to use for tutoring, and we've talked a lot about that